Hello, everyone. I'm going to see if my headphones are working, and they are. We have noise cancellation. Hello, Joshua. So, just starting with about a minute before the top of the hour. That photograph is my new ski helmet, and there's a backstory to it. And so, 10 years ago or so, I was involved in the ski accident. Many of you know that it was a near death experience for me. And that morning, I went to, I was in Sun Peaks, British Columbia, and my son Richard and his then fiance, we and I were skiing. And they said, "We need to get you a helmet. You hadn't skied for a while." And I said, "No, I don't need a helmet. I've never worn a helmet in all my years." And so, long story short, I had my very first run of the day, which was called 5 Mile Run. I landed on my head and had a really bad head injury. So I'm going to get skiing this year. I have plans next month to go skiing in Park City, Utah. And Richard went out and got me a ski helmet. Apparently, it's quite high tech. It has the microphone and the earphones, and we can stay in contact. And then he bedazzled that ski helmet with disco ball material. And so it's just kind of funny. And it occurs to me that I'm going to put you guys on my table so I don't jiggle because I'm a jiggler. So let me do that. I always forget. And there's just some things that apparently I am not capable of learning and remembering to put you on a stationary place so that I'm not moving around so much. And I do notice this when I'm on Zoom calls with clients that I laugh and I jiggle. So there you go. So happy New Year! This is the first YouTube live of the new year. Welcome. A lot going on. It's already the 16th of January. We're already in it. I'm here at Heads Up in Las Vegas, and it's 2 o'clock on the west coast of the United States. Wherever you are, we hope that you're having a wonderful day. It's beautiful here. It's about 71 degrees, which is really nice. I came from Minnesota a week or so ago, where it is much colder, and I know that at least in the northern hemisphere, we are in our winter time. Today, I want to talk about Minnesota. So, if you've been watching the news, if you haven't been under a rock, you notice that Minnesota is having a lot going on, and I want to offer you. Well, I don't know if it's a larger perspective, but a different perspective, and we look at the karmic implications of violence. People ask me all the time, are there more school shootings? Is there more child abuse? Is there more sexual assault? Are there more pedophiles? Is there more violence? Is there more war, more or less than and the conventional wisdom is that these times that we're in are very troubled, and that it's worse now than it's ever been. And I don't know that it is. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and in the 60s we had Vietnam. In the 70s we had drug, sex, and rock and roll. And from my point of view as a clinician, as a teacher, as an influencer, I think that the human condition is what the human condition is, and that we, from a spiritual perspective, go through cycles and rhythms. Now, to say that I am not disturbed by several and many things going on in Minnesota that I'm going to talk about today. And again, I talk about Minnesota because that's where I live. And I live there part time and I live here part time, and I travel to many places. And the question becomes, you know, is any place safe? Where would you like to live on the planet? And I certainly am quite an international traveler, and go to Japan, I go to Asia, Australia, Europe, lots of places. And I live in the United States, and I choose to live in the United States. I could live anywhere, by the way, and I have lived in Europe for many years, and I have lived in many places around the world in my history, and I choose to come back to the United States. Um, I recall doing a YouTube live a while ago when we were deciding our nation's president, and that was a big hot topic about the recent election a year ago now, more than a year ago now, and we've had this new president for a year, and some like him, some don't. And in my history, that's every president. And I have a funny story to relate about that. So, and again, I offer you my point of view as a clinician, as a college professor, as a teacher of spiritual studies, on and on and on. And I do have an interesting, I believe it's interesting to me at least. And if you're watching this, it's interesting to you. So, oh gosh, 10, 15 years ago, I was asked to do, I was hired by a company to do elder evaluations, evaluating for dementia, Alzheimer's, organic brain syndrome among a senior population in Nevada. And I was paid quite handsomely, actually, to travel to many places to do home visits of these elders who were just kind of homebound and really couldn't get out of their homes. And so I would have appointments made, and I would show up to the door. And one of the the questions for a cognition in a mental status exam is, who is the president of the United States? Now I'm going to tell you, um, one of the common responses among these elders was that idiot. Now, this was 15 years ago. I happen to remember who the president was. It was George W. Bush. But I can tell you that over the course of the years that I've done senior evaluations, and I've said, okay, please tell me your name. Now, part of the mental status exam in a clinical sense is, do you know who you are? Do you know where you are? Do you know what year it is? Do you know the time? Are you oriented? Are you conscious, alert, and oriented? Now we say times four. The conscious, alert, and oriented is a way of evaluating human cognition. And any doctor in an emergency department, certainly after an accident, is going to ask some questions. Now, remember, after the ski accident, EMTs and doctors were asking me, what is your name? What's the date? They didn't say, I was in Canada, so they didn't say who's the president of the United States, but they were assessing for my level of orientation. Similarly, when I was doing these elder evaluations to assess for um, Alzheimer's, dementia, organic brain syndrome, I would say, who's the president of the United States? Now, many said at that time George W. Bush or George H.W. Bush or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama or whoever it was. And a good portion of the elders who were demented didn't know actually who it was, but it was that idiot. And that idiot could have been Ronald Reagan. That idiot could have been Lyndon Baines Johnson. That idiot could have been Dwight Eisenhower. That idiot could have been Harry Truman. It could have been any of the presidents subsequent to their lifespan, right? My point is, I wouldn't want that job. I don't know if you wouldn't. So we joke about, gee, our kid's going to be the next president. You can't win. So if you want to have a job in which that you can't win, and I'm not taking up for the current administration. We'll talk about that in a minute in terms of what's going on and what this the benchmarks in history when this kind of thing has happened. People have been asking me lately, how is it going in Minnesota? And the word that comes up for me is anarchy. And I don't use that term lightly. And we don't have that happen in the United States very often. There have been riots and fires and floods and earthquakes and natural disasters. There have been periods of time in American history where there's been a lot of conflict. And in Minnesota, what's going on right now is a great deal of conflict. And it is very polarizing because there are people all over these issues. Now, as I'm talking so far, some of you are thinking about ICE. And that's as I'm talking now, some of you are thinking about the fraud that's been surfacing. As I'm talking right now, some of you are thinking about the Somali issue, the Somali Americans that are alleged to be perpetrating this fraud. Some of you are upset that people are being arrested and it's an immigration and naturalization issue. Some of you are upset that there's the daycare issue that the independent journalist Nick Shirley has gone viral with. And it's all of those things. It's all of those things. To put it in context for me personally, I was raised in Minnesota, went to the University of Minnesota for my undergrad, and the George Floyd killing, I'm just going to say it, call it what it was, occurred literally in the view of the camera was the apartment building I lived at in my undergrad. So this would be in 1980, 1977 to 1982 or so when I was an undergraduate. And and I can't watch the documentary. There is a documentary out that profiles that whole day and what happened and who he was, and it shows the graphic detail of the officer having his knee on George Floyd's um, neck. Now, you're not going to hear me talk about any of these issues from a partisan point of view. I'm very apolitical. I'm not without my opinions because I help people all the time. My role as a therapist, and for those of you that watch me and follow me, and that you are in the business of helping others, it doesn't help you as a helper to be partisan, to agree or disagree. Now, this, and I get accused of, particularly from some of my close loved ones, that I can't be that neutral. Professionally, I am that neutral. You come to my office, whether you're whatever shape or size, my job is to be nonpartisan, to help you find solutions to your problems. I have opinions, and I'll give you another example. So we're going to get into today what's going on in Minnesota. Just so you know, this is very close to home for me. The George Floyd incident was right where I live. I lived. The riots and looting and fires and the burning down of the third precinct and the buildings that were decimated and all the stuff that happened in the wake of the George Floyd incident is my hometown. This is where I'm from. The shooting of Renee Good, the protester who was killed by an ICE officer last week or this week, whenever it was, recently, happened 10 blocks, 15 blocks from where I live currently. So I live on 66th Street. This happened at 50th Street, and probably a 10-minute drive from where I live currently. The Roosevelt High School that you'll see profiled in the media right now is where my mother went to high school. This is my home. This is my hometown. Minnesota, having had the reputation of Minnesota nice and upper Midwest and very kind of boring, has become a hotbed of controversy lately. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And my point, and the reason why this is important, is that a couple things. Number one, what media do you let in? There are so many reasons to be upset these days between the war in Ukraine. Well, pick your country, pick your culture. We've got the war in Ukraine. Then we have the Venezuela thing that just happened. We have Greenland now. Like, are we going to take over Greenland? I don't know. Some of it to me is pretty sensational. We have the fraud in Minnesota. We have the ICE raids in Minnesota. We have ICE raids nationally, by the way. It's not just Minnesota. We have people of color who are afraid, just frankly, just afraid of any color, not just people of Latino origin or Somali origin. What it appears to be, and I'm going to say something that could be construed as pretty inflammatory. Now, I know that Kristi Noem came out and said this is not racial profiling. But having said that, what we do know is that anybody who is of any color other than this one is being stopped and asked in a very direct way, what country were you born? And if they say anything other than the United States, they ask for ID. Now, the interesting thing in Minnesota, Minnesota is a sanctuary state. Everybody has a driver's license. A driver's license isn't enough or sufficient to prove citizenship in Minnesota. Maybe that there are other states where it is, but in Minnesota, many people who are there working legally or illegally, or on a green card or a visa or whatever, have a Minnesota driver's license. It's not weird, it's not unique, and it certainly does not prove citizenship. It does not improve naturalization. It doesn't prove that you have a green card. It doesn't prove that you have a visa or a work permit. And so people are being stopped in the street. They arrested a high school student the other day, a girl, young high school girl of color. And they don't discriminate what shade of brown you are. I have not heard yet that Asian people of Asian ancestry are being arrested or being detained. They're not going into Asian restaurants. They're going into every other kind of ethnic restaurant. They're going into Indian, and I mean Indian like from India. They're going into Native American in Minnesota, which has a large Native American population. Certainly, anyone of African that looks of African descent. Now, what you may not know is that Somalia and Somali Americans have a kind of a distinctive look to them that is very different than other African Americans. Now, I'm speaking biologically and genetically here. I'm not speaking with you, and I know what Somalis look like, and I know what African Americans look like. I know what Africans from Kenya look like. I've been to Kenya, I've been to Nairobi, I've been to Africa, I've spent months in Africa. And I'm talking from an ethnocentric point of view that they do look different. ICE agents, I am told, are going to places, and now this is well documented. So I belong to a neighborhood watch organization called Nextdoor. Nextdoor is a national website where you can put your zip code in, and it'll be, it's neighborhood watch, meaning, you know, people report, they sell their stuff there. Like, it's like, how would it be described? You can look it up, nextdoor.com. And this isn't a promo for that, but I belong to my local neighborhood, and they talk about crime. They talk about the police activity, like, oh, gee, a helicopter landed at the hospital. Does anybody know what that's about? It's kind of gossipy. It can be kind of gossipy. Well, what's going on in the last 4 to 6 weeks is ICE presence near the Lunds and Byerlys on Penn Avenue. Be mindful. And so the neighborhood is, the neighborhoods are, keeping track of where ICE is. Right across the street from the place where I live is a Hilton hotel where ICE is being housed there. And so now understand, the neighborhood that I live in is predominantly white. It's very affluent. I mean, I don't mean to be a pompous jerk about it, but I live in probably the whitest, most affluent suburb of Minneapolis, and it's absolutely inundated with ICE agents. I know that given the subsequent juxtaposition of the Somali fraud stuff, and I'll talk about more about that in a minute, and the immigration and nationalization customs stuff, that President Trump ordered 2,000 additional ICE agents to be sent to Minnesota, the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, along with the FBI, to investigate not only the fraud. And so we have multiple government agencies of multiple jurisdictions. Now, my partner, works for the city of Minneapolis. He is not a police officer, just so you know, but he works in those buildings, SWAT, the Strategic Operations Command, the OEO, I can't remember the acronym, but it's the Operations uh, Training Facility, sorry, the mayor's office, the crime lab, and on so on. So he's very much front and center, seeing what's going on from a Minneapolis police point of view, which is a different agency than Highway Patrol, which is a different agency than SWAT. Well, not SWAT, different agency than FBI, Immigration Customs Enforcement, DEA, Drug Enforcement Agency, and so on. And so I am shocked at my hometown. I am shocked at the level of stuff that's going on. I mean, it's like we are the epicenter right now. Minnesota is not known for being the epicenter to anything. Sorry, it's just not. And I'm absolutely, as my British friends would say, gobsmacked that my own home state, my own hometown now is this hotbed of controversy. So let's break it down. Weeks ago, an independent journalist named Nick Shirley, a young man, a 23-year-old man, took it upon himself to begin to investigate some of the daycares. And Josh says that Minnesota was the center of the Prince universe. And it's fun that we bring that up. Prince is from Minnesota. My sister actually was neighbors with in North Minneapolis when he grew up. And so my sister was older, and Prince is a little bit younger than me, and grew up in North Minneapolis as just a kid. And so my sister knew of him and knew him in the clubs when he was coming up. And Prince was a local boy, and very proud, and tragic that he died of an overdose a few years ago. And in fact, I think that was 10 years ago now, just so you know, to put it in perspective, lest we think we're getting older. Prince died 10 years ago. Michael Jackson died like 10 years ago. So time marches on. I am very proud of Minnesota. I went to the University of Minnesota. I'm very proud to say that I am from Minnesota, and um, if you look at the polarization, and I'm going to just offer it to you. On the one hand, those damn liberals, I'll say those damn Republicans also are conservatives, but the damn liberals have opened a sanctuary state where all of this fraud has been perpetrated. Now, Nick Shirley uncovered daycare fraud, but there are so many for the last couple of years types of fraud. And I'm going to run down the ones I'm aware of, and you may know more than I do. Um, Nick Shirley started going to daycares, and he looked. There was a report published by I don't even know some government agency about the money that was funneled into Minnesota Human Services and how the money was being spent. It was billions of dollars, and he just started knocking on doors of daycares. And it's the videos are available online. You can look at YouTube and just look up Nick Shirley, and he's got a wonderful one. I think it's over an hour long, essentially a documentary of him just going door to door and trying to find out these daycares. And he organized them by how much money they got, and they were getting millions of dollars a year for years. This is not a recent thing that these daycares have been getting millions of dollars a year. Some of them getting hundreds of thousands, some getting 1 million, 1.9 million, and he just started knocking on the doors. And pretty universally there were no children there, and pretty universally there was no real activity, and pretty universally there was not some of the markers that you would traditionally see in a daycare, meaning a playground or things like that. And that he would knock on doors, and the a typically Somali person, male or female, would come to the door and say, no, we're not taking any new uh, uh, children, students. And then he would talk to neighbors that would say that they've been living in the neighborhood for years and that there's never been any children at those daycares. And so he, in his investigative journalistic way, which I thought he did very well, young man, 23 years old, taking his really kind of being proactive about it, saying, "Have you ever seen children here? No. Have you ever seen parents dropping off children here? No." And then what is uncovered has been a series of fraud in the billions. Now, Extended also was a company, an organization called Feeding Our Future, a nonprofit that was alleging that they were feeding 8,000 hungry children a day since COVID. And the FBI has profiled some of these locations, and they have not seen any more than 40 people in these places. So money has been paid to these agencies for, again, millions and millions of dollars for feeding people, and people have not been fed, and on and on. There's an autism fraud where they were asking for money for autism treatment. The number of agencies, increased tenfold over the last decade treating autism, and it was discovered that they were paying off families to declare and have their children labeled as autistic, even though they weren't, and would be getting kickbacks to participate in autism treatment. But there really was no treatment. It was just money being funneled into these agencies and these families. The latest one this week was transportation, non-medical or non-emergent medical transportation, where dozens, hundreds of transportation companies popped up at addresses all over Minneapolis, areas where I live, actually, where there's no transportation. There were no vehicles, but that money was being given to these agencies for providing non-medical or non-emergent medical transportation to doctor's appointments. Just this week, translation services have emerged, that there are dozens and hundreds of translation in Somali, the Somali language, where if somebody has to go to the doctor, they need a translator. They're going to a Somali doctor who apparently doesn't speak English, and that either the person doesn't speak English or doesn't speak Somali, and so at $100 an hour for 8 hours a day, translators were provided. Now, the thing you need to hear is there's the offering of the service, there's the money funneled into the agency providing the service, and then there's the allegations of services provided. But what they're finding out is not only was either the address didn't exist, the building didn't exist, the vehicles didn't exist, services didn't exist, clients didn't exist, but that people were being paid kickbacks to say that they were taking the service, and people were being paid, and agencies were being paid millions of dollars a year to provide services. So the fraud is multivariate, and it's on a number of levels. Um, and where it gets dicey is that there is an outcry among families, and I'm kind of trying to be judicious about how deep down this rabbit hole I go. It is well known in the United States that childcare is very expensive. It's well known that families with multiple children have an economic question. Now, I do this every day. This is my life. I work at a low income mental health clinic. I work with low income families, and we do our best to set up low income families. Now, this is in Nevada where my clinic is. We do our best to help set up services for low-income families for childcare and transportation and medical transportation and durable home medical equipment and psychotherapy and medication management, on and on and on. Veterans help. And those services do exist, and they do provide help to low-income families. This is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a pervasive, at last, I didn't check this morning, but this week I checked, we're at about $20 billion just in Minnesota. I think it was 17 to 20 billion dollars. At least half of that money we are thinking was fraud, meaning that $10 billion to a state, not the largest state in the country, that $10 billion with a B has been perpetrated in fraud. Now, the fraud, the reason why this is horrible on so many levels is, well, I'll just start with the big ticket item. The big ticket item is that now, because TSA apparently has been paid off, that suitcases of cash has been going to Somalia to fund terrorists. So that's the big thing. Never mind the drug implications, never mind the fraud and the money, the federal government money going on, but that we're actually unwittingly, and I'm that the money's been going to fund terrorist organizations in Africa, in Somalia. So that's a big ticket item, and that's kind of some of the outrage. Number two, that hardworking families are doing their very best to provide for their families for care, for education, for medical services, and working families can't get access to daycare, but billions of dollars has been going to daycare to fund daycares. And there have been some news, and I don't know how much of this has reached the national news, but there's been some local news agencies that have just been just calling, getting the list of all the daycares to try to get children, fictional children, frankly, into these daycares, and they say that they're all full and that the waiting list is 6 months. The waiting list is 2 years. One family that I saw interviewed had 3 children, two working parents. They were of an ethnic origin. I'm not going to tell you the origin, but they were not white. They were not. They were of color, and they have waited 5 years to get their children into daycare, and they finally ended up just paying for private nannies at their own expense because the daycares were always full. They couldn't. But meanwhile, you have 590 registered daycares in this particular county in Minnesota that have gotten billions of dollars to provide daycare for low-income families, and even the low-income families can't get daycare for their children because they've been told that there are not services available. Nick Shirley tried to register his son Joey, a fictional child, I believe, and was told that there's no room at the inn. There is no room for children. There is no room because everything is just so overwhelmed. And so you can start to see the complexity of the fraud. Now, Minnesota is a sanctuary state. Minneapolis is a sanctuary city. And under the guise of we want to provide help for everyone, we want to take in refugees, we want to take in the poor huddled masses, which is a quote from the Statue of Liberty, give me your poor, give me your tired, give me your poor huddled masses, and so that they can breathe free. And this is a country, a melting pot. And so the things that America was founded on and taking in immigrants, I'm Scottish and Swedish and Irish, and this immigration idea that we accept the world, anybody can come to America, has gotten so out of whack. And so now, never mind the Somali population, anyone that's brown, I'm sorry, but that's what it looks like. Anyone that's brown, of any color, that's not pure lily white. And I'm sorry, I am lily white. I get to say that. Um, a priest was protesting. He was white, looked very Irish to me, and he was arrested. And they let him go. And he did a YouTube video and just said, "Well, I was detained because I was a protester. I was protesting, this." And he was an older man, looked to be in his 60s, gray beard. And he just says, "I was detained but I was detained and taken to a detention staging area, is what they're doing." And he said that they said that they were just going to let him go because he was no fun, that he was white, and so he was not going to be any fun to process him because he was obviously a U.S. citizen. Um, so the democratic ideals that we were raised with is that we want to take in immigrants. It's a nation built on immigration. It's a nation, and that there is a legal path to do that, and that many people, by virtue of the open borders and the complaints about previous administrations, that all these people came in. Now, statistically, you can't bring in millions of people and not have a criminal or two. That's just the luck of the draw. And so the layers of complexity to this problem, not unlike the homeless problem. You know, Many cities have thrown money at homelessness, and homelessness is a very complex problem. Saw a guy interviewed recently who was a wealthy guy who donated one of his apartment buildings to the homeless. This was not in Minnesota. This was in a different city. And I've worked with homeless, and I've worked in Pasadena, California with homeless people. We set up a sobering station. We set up a homeless shelter. Homelessness, by its nature, is paired with mental illness and drug addiction. Now, there are an increasing number of people who are living in their cars just because they can't afford it, but that chronic uh, homeless, mentally ill, substance using, hobo kind of culture has been around for thousands of years. There's always been people at the fringes of society. And getting back to my earlier question, where, has it always been this way? Yeah, it has. There's always been a percentage of of any population globally, historically, that have been beggars and the down and out and the mentally ill. In this country, we have more safeguards, but still, the homelessness is it's just wild. And I remember working for a decade in an emergency department in LA County, where I was the social worker, and the homeless people, when it would get cold out, they would just kind of say that they had chest pain. They would come into the ER, and because we can't turn anybody away, and they knew that we couldn't turn anybody away. And when I would come in the morning for my shift, all the beds would be full of the drunks and the drug addicts and the homeless people looking to get out of the cold. Now, Pasadena wasn't cold like Minnesota's cold, but my job would be to discharge them back to the street. And I would sit with them, and Pasadena has a lot of money. And we built a beautiful homeless shelter. We built what was called a sobering station back in the day to help people detox from drugs or alcohol, connect them with treatment resources, connect them with AA, connect them with all this sort of thing. And I was told, I'm going to say 80 to 90% of the people, and I'm talking thousands of people over a decade that I interfaced with, were not interested in treatment. They were not interested in a shelter. They were cool people, mostly men, mostly men is who I interfaced with, who'd say, "Dude, the reason I'm on the street is I don't want to participate in your rules. I don't want to have to be a certain place at a certain time. I don't want what you have. I want to be off the grid." And these are the people that would live in the woods or camp or whatever else. And so it's just become an urban nightmare now that these tent cities pop up because people. Now, I'm not trying to be inflammatory here. I've been told by thousands of homeless people that they choose to be homeless, that they don't want to work. They don't want to have to. They go on disability and they get a check every month and they want to spend it on alcohol. And they're very clear about it. I get $700 a month. I'm going to buy beer. That's what I want, and I'm going to panhandle for the rest. And I don't want to go to your shelter where I have to be clean and I have to take a shower and I have to be there at a certain time and I have to look for a job. I don't want to work. I'm very happy doing the way I did. Now, that's a percentage of the population. I was in Japan. I'm going back to Japan this year, and I noticed the very, very few homeless people. And what I was told by the people that hired me to come to Japan was that it's different in Japan in that there are There are homeless, but they live in internet cafes. They will pay a small fee to stay in an internet cafe, and they have different kinds of resources. But it is a different kind of a problem. But make no mistake, there are people who choose to be at the fringes of society. So the democratic ideals, and Minnesota has historically been a democratic state, welcomes everybody. Now, we welcomed the Vietnamese Hmong community in the 70s after the Vietnam War. The Hmong community is now multi generational and embedded in the Minneapolis St. Paul community, and they're very industrious and they've assimilated. The Somalis have not. The Somalis have not assimilated in that they speak their. So you can have in Minneapolis um, native born, meaning US born Somali Americans who are US citizens who speak Somali primarily. They don't really speak English. And so what they've noticed is that the Somali Americans have retained their culture. And we see this. I'm Buddhist and I have practiced Buddhism for 50 years. And there were a number of pioneer Buddhist members who came here who married a US serviceman in World War II, and they came to America with their war brides, right? And as recently as the last 20 years, there were many of these Japanese women who had married US men who didn't really speak English. They've been in the country for 50 or 60 years. They hung out in their culture. They spoke Japanese. Their church, the Buddhist organization, was very much of a Japanese type organization. And so we see it all the time. My own daughter is from Thailand, and her mother, she brought her mother over here, biological mother, um, from Thailand, and doesn't speak a word of English. Has been here for many, many years, but chooses to not learn the language, and that happens. That is a thing that happens with humans. It's not an indictment of any system, and so what we're seeing and what we're discovering with the Somali population is a very well organized uh, fraud ring. You know, And there's about 100 or so people that have been indicted in the last few years with perpetrating this fraud, and I think about 90% of them are Somali. Somali specifically, not African American, not of other African nations, but specifically Somali. And there are a few white people too. Handful of white people who have helped perpetrate the fraud, particularly in this feeding our future fraud scheme with feeding all these people that didn't exist. Now, we take it all the way back to World War II. So I say anarchy. People are texting me, and I to those of you that have offered me support, I really appreciate it. I have a family member who's afraid to leave the house because he's brown. You know, he's Mexican American, and he's afraid to leave the house right now in Minnesota, in a white suburb. That's real. It's happening. It's not. It's not. And I'm not afraid for me. I'm fine. I was going to say I have a green card. I've never lived anywhere. I've never been a citizen of any other country. And even if I were arrested, what I'm hearing, so I'm going to let you know kind of how it works right now in Minnesota. There is a lot of protests. I mean, more than I've ever seen in my entire life in Minnesota. Like thousands of people are hitting the streets and protesting, and they're not nice. They're harassing the ICE agents. They're throwing things, and many of them are being killed. And we have a Venezuelan national a couple days ago that was shot in the leg, who was arrested, and he was a alleged criminal drug dealer, drug trafficker, or whatever it was, and he was resisting arrest. He got shot in the leg. He's fine. He lived, but he's under arrest, and he's kind of the ones they're looking for. They're doing such a sweep of humans. This is terrible, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's like net fishing. You're looking for tuna, you throw the net out, you get everything. You get tuna, but you also get other things that you don't want, other kinds of fish, other kinds of things, animals, sea creatures that you don't want. And some of those sea creatures, seals and sea lions and otters and other things, probably not otters, but I'm not a zoologist. You do a wide swath to try to get the majority of what we're looking for, which are criminals criminal illegal alien, maybe that's the wrong term, immigration. And they're going to get people who are just hardworking people who are innocent. And I'm going to say that what it appears to me is that the protests are actually making it worse. The lady Renee Good, who was shot and killed, was a protester. Make no mistake, she was protesting. Now, the thing that I find interesting, and this is back to YouTube and back to the video body cams and things, because I'm fascinated by all that. I have actually looked at many versions of video of the shooting. I don't like it, it's disturbing. But I figured as if I'm going to do a YouTube live on this issue, I needed to look at all aspects. And depending on your point of view, you could see everything from she was a completely innocently killed person that was doing nothing, all the way to that she hit him and she was purposefully trying to kill and hit an ICE agent with her car, with her vehicle. Depending on your point of view, you know, they've come out that said, depending on your point of view, she's this mother, a single parent, or mother, and has a partner, and is this wonderful person, all the way to that she's a perpetrator of child abuse. You know, and I think that with this stuff, just like with everything else, you can find a point of view. I said in previous videos that you can pretty much validate any point of view you want. You can find it on the internet, if you look, just because, and that's why AI is so interesting. And we're having a conversation today about AI. You can validate any point of view now. You can find evidence. And I don't know anymore what to trust. Now, I have a couple of few points about this. Are we so dumbed down as a society that we don't have our own opinions anymore? Are we basing our opinions because you can have the internet, no, AI, let's just say AI, ChatGPT, create anything, and it's pretty flawless, and I'm looking at, I just don't know what to trust anymore. So you have to kind of get grounded in your own intuition and grounded in what's real for you, and then choose what you want to engage with, because you can go down any rabbit hole and it can drive you crazy. Now, because this is my home state, um, the Democratic point of view is bring us your huddled masses, we will help you. That has become very expensive. And the Somalis in particular, I'm just going to highlight them because they're in the news right now. White people also commit fraud. Everybody commits fraud, so it's not certainly unique to an ethnic group. And as Chris Rock years ago did a wonderful comedy special where he talked about black people who were the N word. He used the N word, and then black people. He goes, black people are good, fine, upstanding citizens, and then there's the N word people. The N word people are criminals and gang members and that kind of stuff. And he goes, but you have the N word people in every ethnicity, and I guess lest I get chastised for using a bad word, but all ethnicities have assholes. Assholes are not specific to any ethnic group. There are patterns, trends, and themes, but sure enough, there are criminals of all shapes and sizes. Crime is not unique to an ethnic group or a gender or an age or a population. There's criminals all over the place. So the intention from ICE, as I understand it, in the FBI, is to collect and round up the criminals and to get them out of the country. Unfortunately, innocent people are being arrested and detained. And so how it works right now is there are staging, and I'm going to call them staging areas. They're not detention facilities, but basically they will go into a Mexican restaurant. This is documented because my son told me this, that there's a Mexican restaurant he knows, and they just went in and they arrested everybody, the cooks, the servers, the customers, anyone that was brown in a Mexican restaurant. There's going to be some brown people. They arrested everybody and closed the restaurant down, took them all to a facility, and weeded out the ones that most of them were legal. Most of them had papers. Most of them could prove that they either had a green card or work permit, a visa, or citizenship, or they were citizens. And the couple, maybe two, that were undocumented, were then detained and deported. And that's what they're doing. And so it's a numbers game. It's very unfortunate because many of the people who are being detained have been in this country for a very long time. The undocumented people have been in this country for a very, very long time, working, paying taxes, and just fine, upstanding citizens, but not citizens. And they are also being included in these sweeps. The other situation happened a few months ago. My son reported this to me. that it was a factory in Nebraska, and ICE went in. There was 400 employees. They arrested everybody. Two of the 400 were undocumented. Shut down the whole plant, shut down the whole company for a day or two, went through the whole process of screening, and two people were deported. And so, and the two people that were deported weren't criminals. So then, depending on your point of view, should anyone that's in this country illegally be deported? I don't know. I would love for us to deport the criminals. I would love for us to find the fraudsters and arrest them and deport them and get our money back from Somalia, if that's where it's going. Um, I agree. I agree that criminals should be taken to task. But I do see a lot, and particularly here at the clinic, we don't ask for citizenship status. If you're a patient here, I have no idea. We have a Spanish speaking, we have a whole Spanish speaking segment of our population. Sorry, and it's not up to me. It's not up to us. We are not mandated to prove anyone. If anybody can get treatment that needs treatment, and that's a beautiful thing about America, right? So now let's look at the other point of view. So the Democrats are being accused of just this, squandering the resources and not Tim Walz. Now, understand, Tim Walz is our governor. Jacob Fry is our mayor of Minneapolis. My partner works for him, technically. You know, Tim Walz is white. Jacob Fry is Jewish, white. Um, Ilhan Omar is Somali. She's the representative to Congress. She's under fire. And we have a number of people that are under fire. The criticism is that there was no oversight. And I, being in the business of compliance with healthcare, kind of have to agree. How much money, and what they're showing is the last decade, $1 million program, and I'm just making these numbers up, but I've seen the graphs. A program that in year one was 1.4 million is now 150 million. Same program, meaning let's call it Feeding Your Future or the transportation or the daycare centers or whatever. And they're just showing these amazing. Now, the one hand is, well, wow, we're helping so many more people. But you would think with a tenfold increase in budget that there'd be some oversight. And what we're hearing from the state and local officials is that on the one hand, there was oversight and that some of these daycares passed inspection. Well, what did the inspection look like? I saw, it was cute. I saw a journalist after the Nick Shirley thing came out. I thought this was interesting. A local journalist in Minnesota, Minneapolis, called a dozen daycare centers, got through to none of them except one, got one person on the phone who didn't speak English very well and said, "Are you doing fraud?" And the guy said, "No, not doing fraud." Well, fraudsters don't admit to doing fraud, and so it's a circuitous route. And so I'm not going to belabor this, but my overarching message today is you need to figure out how engaged you want to be with this stuff. I'm engaged because it's in my home. It's right here. I am not as engaged with the war in Ukraine or Palestine or Gaza, not as engaged with pollution in China or traffic in Nairobi. It's not that I don't care and I don't love people, but I can't, you as a human cannot pay attention to everything. I have been poring over the internet looking for things about this issue because I know I was going to talk about it today. I'm not a protester. I'm not going to be going out into the streets, and there are a lot of people protesting, and it's really disturbing. It's really, really very disturbing. Our hope. Well, before I go there, and here I go. The allegations that this is like Nazi Germany, the parallels are astounding. In Europe, in Poland, in Germany, Central European countries, when the Nazis came to power, they, with their stormtroopers, the SS, went into communities that were known to be Jewish communities, and they just rounded people up. They created what were called Jewish ghettos. And first they sequestered them into their own ghettos, put them all into, these areas way long before the concentration camps. And then ultimately the, exterminations were ordered, and that was not public information. It wasn't they didn't put it on the Hitler did not put on the front page of the newspaper, we're just going to kill all the Jews. That was not public. And I know people, my German teacher in high school lived through that. I know people who have lived through the Holocaust. I know I have direct information about kind of how it went down. And when you start rounding up people, and I'm safe, I guess, and I feel kind of bad about that. I feel bad for people who are just hardworking people trying to do the best they can to eke out an existence. They came to America. Maybe they did it illegally. They're not here with any sort of documentation. Um, I guess we can't have it both ways. If we say that uh, people are here illegally, need to be. The thing that's difficult is um, the people that do that work. A lot of people that I'm seeing now, young people, are not interested in doing landscaping. They're not interested in doing menial labor, that kind of stuff. So I don't know. The conservative point of view is we spend too much money. All this fraud needs to be reined in, and that we need to get the criminals out, and that the open borders have allowed the criminals to come in. I know for me, I was kicked out of Canada as a I tried to get I was going to Canada, and I was going there to meet a client. I wasn't actually getting paid, but I was going to meet a client for a possible work in the United States. And long story short, I admitted that, and I was kicked out. It's like, you can't do. They're like, "What are you thinking? You can't come and work in Canada." I said, "Well, I'm not really working in Canada. I'm meeting a client that's not paid me yet, but I want to talk to her about possibly coming to America to do some work." You can't do that. They were looked at me mortified. And forever and all time, every time I enter Canada now as a tourist, I have to go through the multiple lines to prove that I'm not there to do business, that I'm not there to steal money from Canadian citizens as a worker. And I've had my own experience of being detained and being held at gunpoint and being escorted and kicked out of the country. But I had a similar experience in Germany when I went into East Berlin during when East Berlin still existed, and I was American and I spoke German, and they detained me for a long time, and it's not pleasant. And so I feel my heart goes out to these people who are um, being detained needlessly, and whose businesses are being disrupted. Many businesses right now in Minnesota are closed, not forever, but they've just said, you know what, it's not worth it. We're restaurants, we're factories, we're any sort of ethnic markets, or just if you were in Minnesota right now, most of the people are in the streets protesting, at least in my area. And I'm hoping that this too shall pass, and that we can get back to some sense of normalcy. So what I would have you consider is not so much where you fall in the what's right, what's wrong, but what can you directly control? Where can you influence? And what is beyond you? And if you're stressing out a lot about this, I have been, frankly, I'm just going to be honest. I've been focusing on it because it's my home. It's right. It's right here. I mean, literally right. Well, I got an email from our apartment complex saying we are there posting signs on the door that ICE may not enter. No, I'm sorry, but I live in a tall high rise, very nice high rise. The average age is about 80. I'm the youngest person in the building. It's like a big retirement home. And these are like retired doctors and retired lawyers and stuff. And this is a very affluent suburb. And we, the property management, is concerned because we do have many families, African families and Latino families and things like that live there. And we don't want to take a chance that they're going to, break down our door and start going door to door and arresting our residents. Who, if you live in that building, you're working, you got a great credit score. I'm sorry, these are not criminals that I'm aware of. They're not drug dealers or drug traffickers. It'd be very unusual to have that. But anyway, I digress. So you get to reconcile for you what's right for you, and pay attention to what you pay attention to. Um, I don't have a call to action. I just have a call to action that you have to protect yourself, and you have to do what is right for you, and hang in there. As I said, my mother in the 60s said the country was going to a hell in a handbasket, and that president, whichever president, by the way, it was, Johnson, Kennedy, Nixon, I think we We fired Nixon because he was apparently a crook, even though he denied being a crook. And then Gerald Ford was an idiot, and then Jimmy Carter was an idiot, and then so you can just it's just kind of endemic. Um, this too shall pass. This the pendulum has swung to some hyper and heightened state of control. Maybe that's what we need as a culture. But I want you to take care of yourselves and do the very best you can for your families and stay strong and stay tall. And with that, we will conclude today. So I will see you next week. Have a great day.